So this video is going to be about political correctness and stereotypes. Before I get on to that, I just want to mention in passing, um, we've had a big storm today in the UK, Storm Doris, and it's horrible weather outside. Apparently, a woman has died in Wolverhampton. That caught my attention because it's a city I know well, and apparently it was outside the Starbucks there. I've actually been in that place, so. That's why it caught my attention. My thoughts go out to her family. Apparently, she hasn't been identified yet, but it seems we are getting a lot more storms in the last few years. It seems to be now an annual event of this sort of storm. So, yeah, my thoughts go out to her family. Okay, so stereotypes and political correctness. These are two issues that are closely related, and I want to touch on both of them. I'll start with stereotypes. I'll start with the idea that stereotypes are inherently a terrible thing, and that they inherently tie into sinister types of prejudice like racism. Here's my take on this. I think that firstly, stereotyping is something that we as human beings always do, whether we admit it or not. Subconsciously, I think it is in human nature to stereotype other groups. Um, whether it be nationalities or races, I think that is inherent. I think where it morphs into racism is if you start only focusing on the negative stereotypes and assuming that is entirely what an entire ethnic group is about. Um, that's where it starts getting ugly. That's where it starts getting prejudiced. But I disagree with the idea that a stereotype in itself is necessarily a bad thing because, for a start, stereotypes are almost always based on some degree of truth. Um, so let me throw out a few, just to give an example. The Irish drink a lot. They do. It's a stereotype, but that is true. Irish people, as big part of their social culture, do drink a lot. So do the Scots. What other stereotypes are there? Maybe the Japanese like to be tidy. Well, if you look at Japanese culture, there is a real emphasis there on keeping things nice and precise and tidy, and cleanliness is a big thing in Japanese culture. Um, Black men are good dancers. You have a lot of well-known black acts, music artists. Dance is a big part of the choreography, and they are, in those cases, good dancers. And I can think of many other examples. Um, but that's just some examples. Um, Stereotypes can be either good or bad. That goes without saying. And I can understand people being defensive over negative stereotypes, but I also think people need to be honest. Okay, I'm British. What would be the negative stereotypes about us British? Maybe that we can be a little bit uptight at times. Maybe that we can be a little bit arrogant at times. Maybe that our sports fans behave very badly abroad. Now, does that mean those stereotypes are true of all Brits? All 65 million of us? Of course not. But by the same token, there is some truth in that perception that outsiders maybe have. And I don't really know actually what the outside perception is, but those are certainly some of the things that I think outsiders might perceive negatively about the British. Um, so the point I would make is that when people say, "Oh," I mean, I get annoyed sometimes when you have like a film, and Disney, the company Disney, really comes under enormous scrutiny every single time it makes an animated film. The critics come out with the same sort of things like, "Oh, well, this film is stereotyping that group or stereotyping this group." And the point I would make is, if you're really going to be purist and you're really going to present a situation that is so, present something as so simple. Now, with Disney, in the end of the day, whatever people think of Disney, it's been an enormously successful company that for decades has entertained millions of children, brought happiness to millions of children. And I think sometimes critics in the film industry will just find reasons to be negative. And I think this is also true of social justice campaigners. I tend to avoid saying social justice warriors on the grounds that I don't think it's particularly a negative. I mean, it's intended to be an insult. I don't think it's particularly insulting. I mean, these people get right on my nerves, but I don't think it's the best pejorative to throw at them. I think condescending, arrogant, and control freaks is probably more accurate. Social justice warrior, well, Martin Luther King was described as a social justice warrior, so I'm not sure if it's the best insult. Um, but I think what annoys people about social justice warrior and virtue signalers, and it does tie into this video, is that there's this sort of purist idea of always trying to find some reason to be offended. Now, I take the view if you're making a film about a sensitive subject, and let's say it's dealing with a minority group, let's say, for example, Native Americans, I absolutely agree that the producers should consult with Native American people. I think that is valid. I mean, if I was a director and I was making a film about a historic subject, and let's say it was about Native Americans, I would absolutely consult with historians of the group I was talking about for accuracy, for costumes, that sort of thing. But what people need to remember is that, firstly, film directors are first and foremost in the entertainment market. They're not historians. But I also feel that when it comes to issues like racism, one thing that I've noticed is that social justice warriors cannot seem to tell the difference between depicting racism and being racist. So Quentin Tarantino got criticism for Django Unchained because of the use of the N word. But what I would contend with something like that, it's what he done was he showed slavery in its absolute raw brutality. In the scene in the film where it's set in Mississippi, he pulled no punches. He showed just how toxic it was, just how cruel it was, just how brutal it was. Another bit is the scene where Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who's a bit of a sadist, um, gives the impression he's going to basically bash in the head of the black girl because he's talking about white supremacist eugenics and so on. Um, Tarantino got a lot of criticism for showing those things in raw detail, but including from Spike Lee. But the point I would make is if you're making a film about racism, and there's been other examples, you have to show it as it is. Um, and I can't believe that people cannot understand the difference between depicting racism and and being racist in itself. So being racist is actually proposing racist ideas and arguing for white supremacy or black supremacy or whatever it is. But depicting racism in a film is not racist. In fact, it's the exact opposite because it is not whitewashing history. It's showing history as it was. I mean, if I was a director and I was making a film about the slave trade, I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm going to show it in all its brutality. If I'm a writer, well, in fact, I am a writer. I've worked on numerous short stories. Now, without giving too much away, because I don't want this video to be like a PR thing, but I have covered short stories which have covered contentious historical subjects. And I said to myself, I am not going to self censor here. I'm going to talk about these subjects. I done research on all of them, and I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm going to depict these things semi fictional in terms of the characters, but the events themselves are on historic issues. I'm going to depict them as they were, not as overly sensitive people want them to be. And I think that's very important. Now, clearly, if someone is making a stereotype and they're depicting a certain minority group in a completely inaccurate way, that's wrong, and I can definitely understand why that's problematic. But what people need to understand is history is not rosy. History is not simple. So when a filmmaker or a writer depicts history in a less than glamorous way, the idea that that is somehow promoting racism is utterly absurd. So if you're making a film about 1840s America, the N word was rampant. You cannot pretend that it wasn't. You cannot gloss that over. I mean, the slave masters did not say to the slave, "Oh, you come here, my African American brother, whilst I put you in subjugation." No, they said, "Come here, you effing N word. I'm going to whip you within an inch of your life if you don't do exactly as I say." In the extreme cases. So I'm really a believer in telling things as they are. And that's why I think political correctness is really problematic because its proponents say it's just about politeness. What I would say is it's about dishonesty. And the same goes for um, this idea that stereotypes are inherently bad. I think the problem comes when people will only focus on the negative stereotypes. So if they justify their xenophobia or their racism by saying, "Oh, well, these people are." I mean, I'll try and give some examples. Let's say, I don't know, someone decides to take issue with all Germans because of the behavior of the Third Reich. That would be, it's kind of a stereotype because it's coming into the, I suppose, the Hollywood notion of Nazis and so on. And it's a stereotype of what Germany was in World War II. But it's a very negative image of Germany. Therefore, if you're using that to justify hatred of Germans, that's wrong. Um, so another stereotype might be black gangs in Chicago or Detroit. Certain white supremacists might use that as a way to condone their hatred of all black people because of the behavior of black gangs. Certain black racists might use the behavior of, I don't know, redneck racists, white supremacists to justify their hatred of all white people. So it's in these areas where stereotypes become problematic. But stereotype in itself is not really, it's basically just focusing on a group based on a popular perception of what that group is. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that it is a stereotype. It's not the whole picture. But I don't think it's particularly clever to say, "Oh, well, stereotypes are wrong. Stereotypes are misleading." Not really, because there is something in that. If someone says Islam is not a religion of peace, there's a big problem with Islamic terrorism. It's a stereotype, but happens to be an accurate stereotype. Does that mean that all Muslims are bad people? Does it mean that that then will condone bigotry against all Muslims? Of course not. All I'm saying is, I don't think that political correctness has got anything to do with politeness. I think it's got a lot more to do with dishonesty because it's based on what should be said in order to not offend people. Now, the caveat to this is that I don't think people should go out of their way to offend people just for the sake of it. To try people and just to kind of push the buttons and be provocative just for the sake of it. I think that's fickle. I think it's a little bit childish. Um, so I don't think that people should be crass or disrespectful or cruel for that matter just for the sake of it. I mean, I'm not going to, I don't know, I have my views on the transgender issue. I'm bringing a lot of things into this video, but I happen to believe if you're born with a penis, you are male, right? But I'm not going to go up to a trans woman that is male to female transition and say something really disrespectful to that person. I'm not going to go up and say, "Oh, by the way, why did you chop your wiener off?" No, because it's unnecessary. It's crude. It wouldn't be productive. I would simply respect that person, and so long as they respected me, and I'd just leave it at that. If they insisted that I use their preferred pronoun, well, I'm not so sure about that because it would be asking me to be dishonest. But I think it's possible to oppose political correctness without being an ass, without being a bully, without being unpleasant. And I think it's absolutely possible to be polite and diplomatic without morphing into political correctness. I also think it's possible to depict history, to depict historic reality that is provocative. And if some people don't like it, well, the irony is political correctness is supposedly about respecting, for example, minority sensitivities. But surely, if you're saying that the M word shouldn't be used in a film, well, suppose I'm doing it now. Okay, I'll just say it, nigger. Lock me up. I said it. But I'm saying it to make a point that that word is an inflammatory word and it was a deeply hateful word that was used in a certain context. And I really wish people would understand this. I just cannot understand why when when racism is being attacked, when racists are being ridiculed, social justice warriors are so up on political correctness that they cannot see the irony that they are attacking people who are actually exposing the racism, who are actually pointing the racism out. I mean, that to me is baffling. And it just indicates that they're so uptight with this notion of virtue signaling, with this notion of not offending people, that they cannot realize that depictions of racism are depictions. They're not racism. It's not racism itself. And I'll just close on a point connected to that. I remember on a question time panel, a right wing commentator said to one of the women on the panel, "In Islamic theocracies, you would be stoned to death." And there was this big gasp in the crowd, like, how dare he say that? Because they thought he was being sexist towards her. The irony was he was just telling it as it would be in hard-lying theocracies, because she's uncovered and so on. And social justice warriors just cannot understand irony. I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.